We're now on Chapter 2D, Psychosexual Development. So a newborn has an undeveloped psyche. All the newborn knows is this emotion, this drive to have its needs met. The infant cannot override its basic needs. For example, if the infant feels hungry, it immediately cries. The infant does not have the cognitive capacity to look around and say, "Oh, I'm hungry, but mom is busy right now, so I'll just wait." No, a newborn infant just needs to cry in that moment. There's nothing else it can do. It doesn't know how to get by in the world. It doesn't know anything about the world it's living in. And the infant doesn't know about the rules of society. It just knows, I'm hungry. I am completely dependent on people to feed me, and it demands that its needs are met. Pure id. And so the environment that this infant grows up in is how the infant develops ego and eventually superego. So we can think of libido once again as being the drive for life. It's a great sort of energetic, the great motivation to have to live. So how is it directed? So the psychological theme is that there can always be too much or too little. So if the drive for life is there, there's a need, an energy that has to be satisfied, and it can either be oversatisfied, like there's way too much gratification, or undersatisfied, not enough gratification, or it can be ideal right in the middle. That's with the ego controlling it. So as the infant is developing, it gets either too much or too little of whatever is the need at that particular stage. And if there is not successful resolution, the ego doesn't develop in a healthy way, there's a fixation with certain characteristics. So the oral stage, birth to 18 months, called oral because first off, the physical focus is on the mouth, the lips, the tongue. Sucking, that's how the newborn gets food. That's where its primary source of pleasure resides. So the theme is dependency. It's completely dependent on others to have that need gratified. It cannot satisfy itself. It needs to have that sucking through the mouth in order to live, and it's dependent on others for that. So that's what's being developed at this stage. And so if the needs are fulfilled in an adequate, appropriate way, then great, the infant healthily moves on to the next stage. If they're not fulfilled, if this infant does not have enough opportunity to nurse or to satisfy that need for sucking, they can become mistrustful. Or if it's over-fulfilled, like they're gratified constant, they always have the pacifier, they might have a hard time, according to Freud, dealing with, not getting their way with unsatisfied demands. And so, once again, if the needs are just adequately fulfilled, then there's no problems here, and the person moves on to the next stage. But if there's too much or too little, then we have a fixation, and that would manifest in adulthood with things like tending to do things with their mouth, smoking, chewing on the pencil, always putting something, chewing fingernails, maybe they would say, always doing something with the mouth. And we might see someone who's very dependent or very independent, but too much either way. Typically, though, someone who isn't resolved, who hasn't satisfactorily resolved this stage tends to be dependent and passive. They want everything to be done for them, or maybe they'll flip from being really dependent to being really independent. But that's what the fixation would look like in adulthood. So if someone is always doing things with their mouths, they might say, oh, they're fixated in the oral stage. In the anal stage, the anus is where the gratification is. Freud would also say that these body parts are all linked to sexual kinds of feeling as well. But this is called the anal stage because the main focus at this age, 18 months to around 3.5, is on toileting. That is, learning to control the elimination of urine and feces, and especially maybe the bowels being linked to that. And so once again, we're talking about, Freud always has sex on the mind, and so he's linking this kind of fixation to a sort of pseudo-sexuality. The psychological theme, self-control and obedience. So, the infant is the child, the young child is the only one who can control their own bowels, their own elimination. Like, you can put an infant on the toilet or a child on the toilet, but you can't make them eliminate. And so they have a lot of control over this, and this has to be resolved. Now, the obvious thing is this toileting, but of course, the 2-year-olds are always testing their wills. That's what they're all about, learning to say no and exert themselves. And so the parents have to navigate the right line. They can't be too controlling, but they have to, exert some control. And so there's like a middle road that parents have to find in giving this child some autonomy, but not being, too loose or too tight. And so there's a fixation if the parents don't find quite this path, according to Freud. And the fixation are terms you may have heard. Anal retentive especially is used a lot, and it's used to identify the adult personality, that is someone who was too controlled, and therefore they're too controlling themselves as being kind of stingy, really organized, kind of tight, anal retentive. You can picture someone kind of always squeezing their body, kind of rigid. And on the other hand, we can have someone who's anal expulsive. They just did whatever they want to. They weren't taught any control. So maybe messy and disorganized and kind of defiant, thinking that they don't need to obey anybody. And so this would be like the stage, these would be the two fixations if there's not a healthy resolution, a balance found by the ego at this stage. The phallic stage, phallic relating to the penis, and phallic symbols relating to things that resemble penises, and this is Freud's kind of big focus, and 3.5 to 6 years. And the physical focus being the penis, and he says both boys and girls are focused on it, because boys recognize that they have one, and they start to become afraid that their dad's going to chop it off, as we mentioned earlier, that castration anxiety. And the girls realize they don't have one and feel lesser and envious of the boys. And it is true, children become interested and aware of their genitals at this stage. And so the theme is morality and sexuality, finding who you are sexually. He talks about the Oedipus and Electra complexes, which just relates to erotic attachment to the parent of the opposite sex. So girls feeling, with their dad, feeling very attached to their fathers, and boys very attached to their mothers. He always links sexuality into it. He has the erotic piece in there. And then with that, feeling hostile toward the same-sex parent. And so we talked about the castration anxiety, boys developing the Oedipus complex, that their father wants to castrate them because of their affection toward their mother. So this little rivalry. And the girls having penis envy, feeling that they're lacking and that their mom is lacking and that they've lost it somehow. And so these are kind of the, ways that Freud is thinking about these things. And eventually, the only way to resolve it is by identifying eventually with a same-sex parent. And so that's how this attachment to the opposite sex parent is eventually resolved. And so the adult fixation at this stage, if it's not healthily resolved by identifying with a same-sex parent, might have someone who's promiscuous and amoral, really like hypersexual in their adult life, or asexual, puritanical, like they're really can't even accept themselves as sexual beings. And so once again, this is, according to Freud, the failure of a healthy ego to navigate this. He considered that these elementary school years, all this sexual energy is latent. So it's channeled into academic, social pursuits, learning sports, learning the things that need to happen in order to be successful in the real world. No conflicts, no fixations at this stage, according to Freud. We do know that he's not quite right. Sexual things are happening. There are crushes at this age, and the adrenal glands are maturing, so there's some of the preliminary maturation leading to sexual development. And then finally, the genital stage. This is just the adult stage, post-puberty. And so this isn't really a fixation stage. And so this just suggests that the physical focus is now on the genitals instead of like on the oral or anal. And so instead of masturbation, a healthy adult who's resolved all those earlier stages will now be able to find sexual gratification in intimate relationships. So maturity is the psychological theme, creation of life, enhancement of life. And that just doesn't mean only reproduction. It often does mean having babies and things, but also being intellectually creative and artistic, being constructive in life and society. And so there's not a fixation here. This is just who the adult is, but an adult character who's healthy, who has resolved those earlier stages, will be well adjusted and balanced and have love and work and a nice kind of balance of things throughout their lives. And Freud would have thought that deviant lifestyles, sexual identity issues or sexual orientation, things that we talk about more openly today, he would have thought that those were indicative of fixations at earlier stages. So once again, Freud is a product of his times, as are we all.